So I've been talking to Victoria Barnett. She's in every book on this subject, every single book on Germany and the church struggle, basically, how Hitler took over the Protestant church. Hell, even in books about the Catholic Church, Victoria Barnett is either a writer, an editor, or cited in all of them, every one. She is the world expert on this subject. Specifically, she calls herself an expert on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And I've been talking to her. She has this colleague that she teaches a class with. She appears to be like extremely religious, which is fine, you know. But she teaches about Bonhoeffer at churches a lot. And she has a colleague who is also a PhD expert on Bonhoeffer. And he wrote a book about this subject. Dude's name is Stephen R. Haynes, and the book's title is The Battle for Bonhoeffer. Let me just, you know what? Let me read the description for you guys, the summary or whatever. The figure of Dietrich Bonhoeffer has become a clay puppet in modern American politics. Secular, radical, liberal, and evangelical interpreters variously shape and mold the martyr's legacy to suit their own pet agendas. Skipping down a little, it says, a recognized Bonhoeffer expert, Haynes examines populist readings of Bonhoeffer, including the acclaimed biography by Erich Metaxas, Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Martyr, Prophet, Spy. In his analysis, Haynes treats, among other things, the November 2016 election of Trump and the Bonhoeffer moment announced by evangelicals in response to the U.S. Supreme Court's 2015 decision to legalize same-sex marriage. So here's the synopsis of the book, okay? Dude is sick of people talking about how phenomenally awesome Bonhoeffer is with absolutely no caveats. That's the word. Damn it. Caveats. No moral caveats. I don't even want to write about the guy because he's not relevant to my story, truthfully. Like, everybody's talking about him, like, constantly. Oh, Bonhoeffer, he's the best. He's not. He's, like, irrelevant. The only reason Bonhoeffer is relevant to any conversation is in a religious context. That's it. Before I knew a lot about this subject, when I was still learning about this subject, about like the church struggle and stuff, I realized that Dietrich Bonhoeffer, major figure in like evangelical culture or whatever, didn't do half the shit that people said he did. So anyway, they claimed that he was involved in the assassination attempt against Hitler in July 1944, I believe. That's not true. That's a lie. I found unequivocally and beyond question that it is a lie. There's a few places that I looked, I couldn't find a word about his involvement, and I know why he was captured. It was Operation 7, not the July 20th attack on Hitler. So I'm like, why do people keep talking about this? Why do people keep saying this? I read a couple of books that are legitimate books in the field by experts in the field, and they said Bonhoeffer was executed for his involvement in the July 20th plot. And I was like, okay, that's weird. I got to get to the bottom of this now. The answer is very complicated, but basically, I'm just going to tell you. The answer is he was not involved in the plot to assassinate Hitler. He was not. George W. Bush quoted Bonhoeffer in, I think, 2002 in a speech that he gave when he went to Germany, said that the dude was like this morally upstanding, honest, good person, the only good pastor ever. And of course, Erich Metaxas wrote a book on him called Bonhoeffer, and it purports to be the dude's biography, all kinds of other stuff. I mean, evangelicals are enraptured with this guy. But it turns out, like, the evangelical perception of who he is complete nonsense, all the way down. The scholars that I've spoken to on the subject have told me that he was a morally complicated person, just like every other Christian from that era. He moved out of the country. He was rich. His dad had a chauffeur and everything. In 1933, when things really started to go down, he moves out of the country, goes to London. And I believe from there he went to like New York City and then back to London or whatever. There was some in-between stuff there. But anyway, 1935 rolls around. He says, I have to go back to experience this zeitgeist which means like spirit of the times, like culture or whatever. This trouble that my people are going through. I have to be there to experience it with them. Honorable, right? at its face. There's one account of Bonhoeffer in Germany walking in the street. Brown shirts start hassling this non-Aryan, this Jewish person, who's sitting on an Aryan-only bench. And Bonhoeffer sees it happening and says, if I don't step in, something really bad's going to happen. So he steps in and says, hey, I'm so glad you guys found my friend. Thank you for finding my friend. Goes up and grabs the guy's arm and walks away. And dude says, thank you so much. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't done that, That's honorable stuff, right? The scholars that I'm reading in the fields, though, are telling me that he did that stuff out of kind of a sense of Munchausen syndrome. Like, he wanted to be viewed as a martyr, as special, as somebody who suffered for his people or whatever. And he didn't, there was a lot of anti-Semitic writing in his books, in his essays and everything else. He didn't seem to like, let me rephrase. He seemed to be captured by the spirit of the culture like everybody else, at least to some degree. But at least he had this, like, obsession with making himself look and feel special by how much he helped the people around him. I suppose that's good. He wasn't much better than anybody else, though. He just had kind of a different, like, viewpoint on things. And nowadays, people teach his sermons like they're something special. In reality, they're not. He talks about something called cheap grace, where it's easy to sacrifice some things, like sacrificing your time to go hang out with your friends. That's an easy sacrifice. Or, like going to church, for example. That's cheap grace. But you should have basically expensive grace, which is you should be paying a high price for worshiping God. Why? Got me. I don't know why he seems to think that you should pay a high price for worshiping God. But that's like one of his main sermons. Guess what? I can get a sermon like that from any douchebag within 100 miles of me. They all have these weird little sermons about stuff like that. That's not special to me. I respect that the guy was not a Nazi. He wasn't. But he did favor Christians over others. When he was arrested for Operation 7, he was part of the Abwehr. I don't know how it's pronounced. I've been calling it Abwehr. Abwehr. It was the German intelligence group, like the German CIA, basically. And the whole group, all the way up and down the line, was anti-Hitler, funny, like hilariously. Abwehr. Okay, Abwehr. So he joins the Abwehr when he returns to Germany in 1935. Actually, he joined it in 1938, I believe. Between 35 and 38, he's going around like trying to seed churches, basically. So 1938, he joins the Abwehr, who was very anti-Hitler. Even the admiral at the very top of the organization was anti-Hitler. So they spend a year trying to plan this event called Operation 7. And they were trying to save 7 people. They were trying to get them out of the country. So the plan was to basically hire them on as Abwehr agents and then send them on a foreign mission to the United States via Switzerland and send them with like $100,000 each so that they'd have money to be established. And then they disappear. Oh, check that out. They disappeared on us. Oh, that sucks. Give them false papers to get them to join and everything. They had to get prior approval by Heinrich Himmler himself, the head of the SS, like in Hitler's inner circle, to do this. I mean, he didn't know that they were Jewish. He just knew about like this foreign agent plan and that he approved it. So his brother-in-law, Doniani, is his name, I believe. I think it was him that arranged the passports and arranged to have the names removed from the manifest. I don't remember, like the train manifest. I don't remember if it was him that did that, but there were 3 people involved: Bonhoeffer, Doniani, and the admiral at the top of the German CIA. So they do this whole thing to get 7 people out of the country, and at the last moment, they had an opportunity to bring it up to 14. They saved 14 people that way instead of just 7. Phenomenally good, right? Except it was almost exclusively Christians who had like a Jewish grandmother or something. It was almost exclusively Jewish Christians rather than just Jews. You know, I'm glad he saved anybody. That's fantastic. But that's weird, isn't it? Is that weird to anybody else? The guy was morally complicated, it's a point. And when you realize, oh, yeah, let me finish the story about Operation 7. He died. Bonhoeffer died. When you realize that Bonhoeffer was not like the pinnacle of who people should be or want to be or whatever, he's not perfect at all. When you realize that, it starts to crumble. It starts to feel like you were like lied to and cheated. Now, was he a monster? No, he wasn't a monster. He just wasn't like a hero to the degree that like evangelicals portray him. He had anti-Semitic leanings of his own. He had a Christian bias, and he had a persecution complex. He wanted to be persecuted. He believed that was like part of the deal. You must suffer if you're going to be a proper Christian. And if you don't suffer, then you won't make it into heaven. So his persecution at the hands of like the Gestapo and everybody after Operation 7 failed was all part of the plan. It was part of the deal. He needed that or he couldn't get to heaven. So I don't believe he threw the plan or anything. I believe he would have continued operating as long as he could to save people. But, you know, you're getting what I'm saying here now, right? You're picking up what I'm putting down? Anyway, with Operation 7, to kind of sum this up a little bit, they got 14 people out, and the Gestapo was tracking it on the other end. They saw a trail of, like, people setting this thing up so that Jewish escapees could arrive in New York City or in Switzerland. Where they saw this happening, but they didn't know who was doing it or where they were coming from or anything. The day that it happened, they saw that the money that the Jews were given was withdrawn from an Abwehr account. And that meant it had to be people at the absolute highest ranks of the organization. They arrest Bonhoeffer, they arrest Doniani, they arrest Doniani, who was his brother-in-law, and they put him in jail, and they interrogate them. But for the first few months of Bonhoeffer's interrogation specifically, they were separated. Of his interrogation, he was not, like, beaten. He was threatened. He was, you know, scared shitless. People said, we're going to kill your family and all kinds of crazy stuff. But he was not beaten until they finished, like, interrogating Canaris, the admiral, basically, of the Abwehr. The admiral underwent the most intense torture any human being has ever experienced. The most intense ever. And he didn't break. That is some shit, right? Oh my God. Dude experiences the most intense torture ever and doesn't say a word, doesn't say a single name, doesn't give anything up. Oh my God. Anyway, so Canaris dies. They search his house and find his diaries. He was the top of the intelligence agency. So he had all kinds of information written down. Most of it was in his head, but some of it wasn't. And they started busting open the whole thing. They figured out who was who and who's involved and everything, all the way up the chain. So the July 20th assassination plot of Hitler, Canaris was involved in that, but not Bonhoeffer. He was not involved in that. He was in jail for Operation 7. When they discovered Canaris' involvement in the July 20th plot, he was the one that had all of the military contacts necessary to make this happen, because it was a military coup, basically. July 20th attack was the assassination attempt. So anyway, they discover his involvement, and they find about 1,000 people who were like part of the underground and connected to him in some way, basically. They just destroyed this whole underground cell of like 1,000 people. Many of them knew Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was like very integrated into this whole thing. And that's when they realized that Bonhoeffer was connected to the underground so deeply. They didn't know until that point. He was in Buchenwald, then moved to a Gestapo prison in Berlin when they discovered his connections to the underground, and then moved to Flossenburg concentration camp where he was hung. I believe that's how it played out. Anyway, so he was killed for his involvement with the people that did the assassination attempt on Hitler on July 20th. He was jailed in April 1944. The attempt happened in July 1944. Let me just verify those dates. When was he jailed? I'm sorry, 43. He was arrested in 1943. April 1943, my mistake. Doniani and Bonhoeffer both arrested in 1943. He was initially charged with conspiring to rescue Jews, but then, after the failed 1944 July 20th attempt on Hitler's life, that's when they uncovered everything, discovered what he was up to and everything. So anyway, when he was in jail, all right, let me say this. Before going to jail, though, he decided to get engaged. That's nice, right? Got engaged. All right. Except that he was 38 years old, born in 1906, arrested in 1943. I'm making sure my math is right here. Yeah, so he was 38. 38 years old, gets engaged to an 18-year-old. He got engaged to an 18-year-old at 38. Wow. Okay, whatever. I mean, it's legal. It was legal at the time. Who am I to judge, I guess? True love or whatever. That's kind of fucking weird, but all right. Except she had been his student since 11 years old. Oopsie daisy. Believe it or not, it gets worse. She was also the granddaughter of his best friend. Oh my God. Anyway, morally complicated to say the least, is my point here with Bonhoeffer. I'm always learning new information on this subject. Things that I say could be incorrect, so please fact check me in the comments if I'm wrong about anything. I try really hard to be correct, but I'm very confident about everything that I've said up to this point, or I wouldn't have said it. There's one more thing I want to mention about him. I'm trying to remember. Oh, the fact that he was engaged to an 18-year-old. While he was in prison, that worked to his advantage. They didn't see each other after the engagement because that was like standard. Like when you get engaged, you're not supposed to see each other to guarantee you're not like doing any funny business like behind the scenes or anything. So they didn't see each other for, I don't know, a long time. I don't know how long. And then he was arrested. But the engagement worked to their benefit because when he was in jail, she was allowed to come see him since she was his fiancée. Nobody else would have been allowed to do that, to go see him otherwise. So anyway, it was a pretty useful thing in the end. He got messages to the outside world, explained where to find this and what papers to burn to protect these people and everything else. Anyway, point is that Bonhoeffer was morally complicated. And anybody that says he's a good person, he was always a good person, and there's no morally complicated quality about the guy, doesn't know. They just don't know. Not to mention the fact that a bunch of quotes that are attributed to him are not from Bonhoeffer. He never said this stuff. This is just made up. Like, let me give you an example. Martin Niemller was Bonhoeffer's like kind of colleague in the confessing church, working with Niemller to try to stop Hitler's takeover of the church for a short time until Bonhoeffer left. Niemller was a Nazi. He voted for Nazis in 1924, 28, and 33. He just didn't like the fact that Hitler was interfering with the church. So Niemller starts fighting Hitler's kind of takeover or whatever of the Protestant church, despite being a Nazi. He was a Nazi all the way through. All the way until he went to a concentration camp in 1937, and from the concentration camp, applied to be in the German Navy to fight for Germany. That is how Nazi this guy was. So 1937, he goes in, he spends 4 years in Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Then he's moved to Dachau concentration camp for 4 more years. So now it's 1941 when he gets to Dachau, and then 45 when the war ends, when he gets out. In Dachau, he was placed in privileged cells, like of people that can't be killed, but still need to be in there and shouldn't be treated any better. They just, don't kill them, basically. Next to priests and other religious figures that it would be really bad if they died because there'd be so much public outrage. Anyway, he's placed in those cells, which happened to sit next to the torture cells that the Nazis used at Dachau. So this dude sat there day in and day out watching people get tortured next to him and still supported the Nazis, still supported them. After the war, he was put in basically a camp by the Allies as somebody who was suspected of working for the Nazis. Like, that's how deep in it this guy was. Anyway, he was released, and he took part in the denazification effort for the church. By the way, if you want to hear about any of this stuff, I talk about it at length in my book. It's coming out soon. Check the comment or check the description, or owenmorgan.com. Check my website for that. It'll be on Amazon, Audible, and everywhere else. Anyway, Niemller was released and finally takes his wife and his kid, Elsa, back to Dachau because he wants to show them the cell that he spent like 4 years of his life in, you know. And when he arrives, he sees a tree with words painted on it. They say, 200,000 people were cremated here. And that's the moment, after the war ended, when everybody else was like, wow, that's really messed up. Then he said, wow, that's really messed up. Convenient time to say that, huh? Anyway, that's Niemller, Bonhoeffer's colleague. I give him no credit for being who he was. No credit. I know you need to understand, like, the context of the time and what they believed and everything else, but that's just fucked up, man. These people were fucked up. They were bad people, is my point here. Anyway, back to Bonhoeffer. He wasn't like Niemller in that he was a Nazi. He wasn't. But he was definitely morally complicated, to say the least. And if you're listening to an evangelical tell you that he was like a gift to the earth from God, then they're either uninformed or they're lying. Eric Metaxas lied through his entire book, Bonhoeffer. After Niemöller, got out of it and everything and changed his mind, he went on tour around the world giving speeches about how he did the wrong thing, basically, in the moment. Like, he should have fought against the Nazis when he didn't. And in those speeches, he tended to start them off with a poem that he wrote, depending on, like, which group he was talking to. Like, if he's talking to a very religious group, like Catholics or something, then he'd start it differently. Catholics hate communists. Oh, my God, especially at that time. The full poem was, first they came for the communists, and I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I said nothing because I wasn't a socialist. Then the trade unionists, and then... who was the other one? There's a point to what I'm saying here. Communists, socialists, trade unionists, Jews, and then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. That's the poem, and it's beautiful, right? If he's speaking in front of Catholics, he would just leave out the communist part. Anyway, that quote, that poem that he wrote, is attributed to Bonhoeffer. But it wasn't Bonhoeffer's. It was Niemöller's. Bonhoeffer had nothing to do with it. People just lie about the dude constantly. It blows my mind that people can just, like, make shit up. Like Eric Metaxas, just make shit up about him. And go out there and write a book. By the way, do you know how many reviews Eric Metaxas' book has? Like 7,000 on Amazon. Okay, 7,000 reviews, right? You know how many reviews Bonhoeffer's actual biography has? Written by his best friend, Eberhard Bethge, and translated by the Bonhoeffer expert in the world, Victoria Barnett. You know how many that one has? 54. 7,000 to 54. This is the most lied about person in the Second World War, maybe. I might take it that far. Maybe not, but he's up there. Anyway, morally complicated is the point. Tell me what you think. Seems like he only sides with whomever is on top at the moment. No empathy. That's what it seems like to me with Niemöller. However, I'll give him this. Germany was very nationalistic at the time, like out of this world nationalistic. They were obsessed with themselves. That was just the culture at the time. Nobody could escape that. When you're told that you're the best by everybody and their brother constantly, you start to believe it. What else are you supposed to do? You're born and die in this culture where you are the best, better than everybody. So I understand that that we need to take this in context, basically. We need to understand that the guy lived in this environment. I get that. And I understand that he fought against Hitler's control of the church. Additionally, he tried to join the Navy. Well, let me rephrase. A lot of other people tried to join the military, the German military, after the war started because they wanted to fight for Germany, because they believed that they wanted Germany to come out on top. They didn't want Germany to lose the war. Like, nobody, if America did something bad, like they started a war, say on trumped up charges against a Middle Eastern country. I'm just throwing out an example here or something, claimed that they had weapons of mass destruction or whatever, even if they didn't. Americans who are not far right nationalistic extremists aren't the only ones that would join. It would be normal people too, because they want America to succeed generally. You could say maybe that's why Niemöller tried to join the Navy from his prison cell. I'll take that step. I'll go that far and give him that grace. But, they were all morally complicated. They were not heroes, is the point. All of them.